to the Passenger Seat Podcast, a podcast designed to fill your passenger seat with chat about classic cars, all recorded from my 1968 Morris Minor Peggy. I'm Becca, and today I'm going to be looking at whether the reasons I bought Peggy 5 years ago hold up today, whether they're still kind of relevant, and whether they're things that people might still be considering as a young person getting into classic cars. So next week will be my anniversary of having had Peggy for 5 years, and you guys have been providing some fantastic questions for me to answer in that podcast, and if you've got any more, be sure to pop those down in the comments down below, because I haven't recorded that one yet, so you've still got chance to get in with your questions. But today I'm going to be thinking about why I bought Peggy and whether those reasons are still relevant today, and whether anything's kind of massively changed, whether I stand by my decision to have bought Peggy 5 years ago, and whether I think it's something that I would still do again, knowing what I know now. I bought Peggy 5 years ago because I was moving out, and there's a whole podcast about the process that I went through buying Peggy, but I was moving out, no longer really had access to my parents' daily drivers that work at Nissan Micro, I think at the time, and so I needed to buy my first car, and that meant kind of making a decision about what that was going to be. And I'd had a look round. It was kind of in the middle of COVID, and on my little daily walks that we were allowed back then, I'd been walking around looking at all the cars on the estates and stuff like that, and none of the modern cars had really taken my fancy, and I wasn't really sure what I wanted. And I spoke to my family and I spoke to my partner, and another problem that I was having was the fact that moving out would mean that I wouldn't really be going to shows necessarily in the same cars as my family, because I'd have to get to their place and then go on to the show and stuff like that, which is obviously doable, but it'd be more interesting if I could start bringing my own car to events, or going in a car into events. And my dad had 2 classics at the time, he's now got 3, but was unable to get me on the insurance because I was under 25, and it was something that was a big problem then. So this, paired with the fact that nothing modern really appealed to me, started this seed of an idea of what if I bought my own classic car. And I started thinking about, okay, what sort of classic car could I have? What am I looking for? What things would I need from a car for it to be my everyday only car? And so we're going to go through some of these and see if they still hold up today in terms of whether what I thought the Morris Minor would do is still the case, whether I still agree with that, and whether it's still as fun and enjoyable as I thought it would be. Like I said, the first thing that was playing on my mind really was I can't get on my dad's insurance as a named driver, and that unfortunately still is a struggle with a lot of insurers. Under 25s, it's so hard to get them on as named drivers. Some insurances, if you're with a club who is with their insurances, some of them will do kind of side-by-side driver, but named driver continues to be quite tricky, especially if they don't necessarily have access to their own car, or even if they do, it's just so expensive a lot of the time to get them on. So that was something that definitely played into it, and unfortunately it is still the case. And doubly unfortunately, in a lot of cases over the last 5 years, it's actually got harder for young people who buy their own classic car to get insurance. There's been some great people who have added their names and their kind of stories to this campaign to try and fight this, but it still continues with some classic insurers to be a problem. The thing with the Morris Minor though is, especially the later ones, they are somewhat on this cusp of being able to be insured with a regular insurance company that just does your everyday cars, and so you can as a young person still get insurance, but getting classic insurance hasn't got any easier really, and I think it's something that we still need to continue to work on. There's some glimmers of hope. The FBHVC have been doing some work, I believe, with Peter James, and some insurance companies have been doing work with various car clubs, but it's still an area that needs massive work if we're going to continue to bring young people into the classic car scene. Now, spares availability, that was another big thing. My family come from owning Roots cars and Singers and stuff like that, and yet I didn't buy one, and part of that was because when I sat down and spoke with my parents, they said you're going to need something if you're daily in it that you're going to be able to get parts for really easily. Parts being available from your local kind of motor factors in some cases, but also quickly and easily from a range of suppliers. And that was definitely the case for the Morris Minor, and I was looking at kind of Triumphs and stuff like that. And it still is the case. We have unfortunately lost a few of the suppliers over the last 5 years, the big one really being Charles Wares. But there still is a lot of availability, which works massively in favour of the Morris Minor in terms of usability. There's been many times over the last 5 years where I've been hugely grateful to the fact that something's broken on my way home, I've been able to order it up and it's arrived kind of the next day or the day after that, and been able to kind of keep myself motoring relatively easily and straightforward. On stuff that's a little bit more slow time, I've been able to use other sources and get kind of a reasonably competitive price, and that's something that I continue to advocate for, making sure you buy your parts from a range of sources to make sure that that stays an option for these cars. But I have seen parts availability for other cars become far more improved than I think it was 5 years ago. Some have, by the way, been lost, but I think there is an awareness now in a lot of clubs that if people are buying these cars, they want to work on them and they want to be able to get the parts quickly and easily, and so having that parts availability is something I think a lot of clubs have now started to work towards, and also the parts advice. And I think owning a Morris Minor has also made me aware that there is a lot of kind of crossover of parts, a lot of parts bin parts that I don't think I was fully attuned to 5 years ago, that makes a lot more cars viable than I think I first realised. Another thing that really spoke to me was the comfort. I went and tried out a variety of classics that fell into that. Able to insure them, tick. Able to get parts for them, tick. Let's go sit in them and see what's available. And that was some really good advice from my mum, because she'd gotten a Morris Minor and not found it very comfortable, and so they'd ended up swapping it for a Riley Alf. So it was some fantastic advice from her to actually go and sit in a load and see what was comfortable. And what I thought I wanted, a Triumph Herald, didn't feel that comfortable to me. Peggy, well, a Morris Minor, I sat in it and I felt incredibly comfortable, and I felt like everything was in the right place. And it's so important with these classic cars that it is, because the adjustability of your seats and where you're sitting and all of that is often minimal. So to make sure that you feel comfortable and like you can reach everything that you need to is going to be really important. And luckily for me, Peggy continues to be incredibly comfortable. I've improved the comfort by reupholstering these front seats, and I could do long journeys in her old front seats, but these are so much better. I'm not sure it's as comfortable for Jamie because the leg room and stuff isn't as good. So when he is a passenger, he's that bit taller, it's not as comfortable for him. But for me, I would much rather do a long distance journey in Peggy than I would a modern car in anything else, because I just feel so at home, I feel so comfortable, I feel like everything is kind of reachable, my foot pedal position is great, and yeah, I love it, and I think I'm very fortunate that I found a car that suits my height, etc., as well as this does. And it's obviously only got better with the improvement of these front seats, and it's got better for my passengers in the back as well by me adding that extra padding in a few years after I got her. The affordability of the car was another interesting thing. Morris Minors are reasonably plentiful, which means that they don't often go for silly money, and the parts availability feeds into that kind of affordability aspect as well, because it means that they're reasonably cheap to get hold of. Obviously, you guys know that in the last 5 years I've spent quite a lot of money on Peggy. It's not a cheap way of motoring at all. I don't think I went into it thinking, oh, this is going to be cheap because I don't have to do tax and my insurance might be cheaper. My insurance might well be a smidgen cheaper. I think a lot of young members do find that it is a little bit cheaper on Morris Minors than it would be on a modern. It's not always the case. It depends on the modern, it depends on the Morris Minor. I think recently some young members have found that the earlier stuff, like the Series 2s, comes out cheaper as well. But insurance is just nonsense, magic pulled out of a hat in a lot of cases. It's not something you can predict, and it isn't always cheaper on a classic than it would be, especially with the mileage and use that I have on the car. But again, in terms of maintenance and motoring, if you're not doing the work yourself, you are going to end up paying for maintenance work more frequently, because you're going to have to do servicing and stuff like that. And servicing is not necessarily the easiest thing to get your head around if you are not immediately technically minded. It's taken me 5 years to do a successful, non-messy oil change. That only happened at the weekend, and I've done 40,000 miles. So those services have been coming reasonably regularly, and yet still it's taken 5 years for me to go, actually, that went reasonably smoothly, and it's all running okay, touch wood. And I didn't spill a load of oil everywhere, and I didn't lose this, and I didn't knock something else out of play and whatever. So it takes some perseverance as well as some cost, and obviously rust is your eternal problem with a car of this age, because you don't know what's been done previously to try and help it, if anything. You don't know what poor bodges and stuff have been done. So over the years I've spent little odd bits on welding, and then obviously had to do, well, I didn't have to, but chose to do that big restoration, which cost a lot of money. And I am hoping that I'm now at a point where, in terms of welding and stuff like that, I'm keeping on top of a solid car rather than desperately chasing down endless little patch repairs. And so I'm hoping that in some ways I'll have saved myself a little bit of work in that regard, and a little bit of money in the next 5 years or so, by having that big expense there, and stop having to make those kind of little, oh, I need to fix this bit, I need to fix that bit. But inevitably there's going to be other stuff that comes up. There's going to be things that you have to replace due to where they weren't necessarily designed to do as many miles, and also a lot of the parts that we're buying now are not to the quality that they were when they left the factory, and so they aren't necessarily holding up as well as they might have done originally. You guys know how long a dynamo lasted on Peggy. It lasted 51 odd years. As soon as I put an alternator in, I've had to replace that within 4 years because it had died. So it's certainly not cheaper, I would say, than running a modern car. Our modern car that we have on the fleet now still costs us money. We have to have MOTs, we have to have services and stuff done on it, and bits and pieces. And we begrudge that more than spending it on our classics because it's a hobby, because we enjoy it, because we get something back out of it. Whereas you kind of think of your modern as just something to get you to and from the shops, or when you have to use it as a spare car kind of thing, and that's not as kind of accepted. And so I think as classic owners we turn a blind eye a little bit to the cost, and we think, oh well, it's some of these parts are cheaper and whatever, but I think we're all kidding ourselves a little bit, and that's not a reality of it. I bought Peggy with some inheritance money from my grandparents, and I remember having a conversation with my dad about the fact that I would hope that my grands would be pleased about the fact that some of her money had gone towards giving me this car and the experiences that came with it. And I think at the time I was thinking about kind of the odd picnic and stuff like that, and that was part of what I bought into when I bought the car. It was part of my reasoning, was it's going to give me some experiences, some happy memories and stuff like that. I don't think I could have ever imagined 5 years ago the amount of things that this car has given me, in terms of experiences, in terms of friendships, in terms of people that I've met, in terms of places that I've been able to go to. And I know some people have asked me about those for next week's podcast, so I will go into more details about some of what those were. But in terms of me buying this car for that reason, she has well and truly surpassed that. I have had so much more than the odd Sunday picnic and happy drive out in her, as well as my ability to get to and from work. She has well and truly surpassed that, and I am so grateful to that past me for kind of making the leap because of that, because I wholeheartedly believe that spending my 20s behind the wheel of a 50-year-old car has massively shaped them, and all for the better, and I'm so thankful to it, and it's just been incredible, and I'm so grateful. In terms of some things that I was worried about and whether they have come true, the flip side of that is reliability. I have been exceptionally fortunate, again touch wood, that most of the time Peggy gets me there and Peggy gets me back. We've only been on the back of a recovery truck, again touching wood, so we need more wood. If I only had a traveller, but no, it's only been on the back of a recovery truck once in the last 5 years. We've had to tow it to places and make fixes, put in a new engine and stuff like that, but it's been stuff that, thanks to the support network that the car has given me, has been manageable and doable, and it's been enjoyable. And so I've been able to continue enjoying her. In terms of reliability, because I'm using her so frequently, issues that you might find with a car that you only use occasionally crop up a lot of the time in places that are more easy to handle and deal with. because you go, oh, this has happened, all right, I'll fix that when I get home, or oh, this has happened, I won't use Peggy today, I'll have to use the modern car and I'll get that ordered and fixed or whatever. So I am quite fortunate now that I have other cars that I can use, but for the most part, using her daily has kind of improved her reliability, and I don't really worry about hopping in her and doing a trip and whether I'm going to make it to work and stuff like that, because she is generally incredibly good to me. But that's because of what you put into a car and the use that you put into a car as well. Alongside that concern about reliability is that idea of usability. How usable is a 1968 car in today's traffic, in today's needs and uses? And I have not really had any major problems with being able to use this car as I would another 4-seater car. We've moved house with it. We've been on week-long holidays with it. We've been on camping trips with it and been able to kind of finagle everything into the car eventually and make it work. So it is doable, and you can get a lot of stuff in a Morris Minor even as a 2-door saloon. Sure, you might think, oh, 4-door saloon, easy to get stuff in the back, but actually you as a front seater driver don't actually get as much space. A van would be amazing, and I'm sure you'd get an awful lot of stuff in it, having experienced that, but you can get a lot of use and space out of a 2-door saloon, and I think part of that comes from just being used to adapting whatever you need to the car space that you've got. We had family holidays and trips in 30s cars and 60s cars and all of that stuff, and sure, we bought Christmas cars when we needed extra space, and me and Jamie have to do that sometimes, like when we went to Wales and we knew we were going to be there for a week and we had the camping gear and stuff like that, and we needed 2 cars. There's adaptations you sometimes have to make, but actually they end up being quite fun. It's an incredibly usable car. I sit very happily at 60 on the motorway most of the time. Yes, there's some small adaptations to her, but I think most Morris Minors will sit happily at 60. A lot of people think they can't really go above 50, but I've found in the 5 years that there's this point at kind of about 50 to 55 where they sound like they're going to go really loud, and that's their top limit, but then you get past 55 and they sit happier, and everything kind of hums out and sits quite nicely at that point. So it is entirely doable to just have a pretty nice run on a motorway. You're not going to be the fastest car to get there, but equally you're going to have a much nicer time and build in those stops. And I think actually that sort of approach to driving has become more popular in the last few years. With the rise of things like EVs, I've seen service stations and service stops actually improve massively over the last 5 years, because people are making more stops if need be, and they are expecting to spend a little bit more time. And I think it's quite interesting that we went through this period and decline of service stations from kind of their heyday when they were first introduced as almost iconic stop-off locations, to them now being back on the rise and back of interest to people. And it's actually been quite enjoyable to see new ones pop up. We've got a great one started near us back at Sawtree, where there's not been one for ages, and it's actually really lovely, nice investment, and whilst it's on our doorstep, it's actually worked out for both me and Jamie a really great last minute stop before we get home if we need to grab something or pop to the loo or whatever, because there's a horrible train crossing that if you've been on a long journey and you need the loo, you want to stop before you end up crossing. So actually this rise of service stations has made doing longer journeys in these cars far more enjoyable and usable, especially if you get really into rating and enjoying the differences of service stations. They're not all going to be great, but it does become a bit of a hobby, I think, for a lot of us who are making these longer trips in these fantastic cars. But she's so usable. In short, it wasn't really something I needed to worry about. We've had some fantastic trips, like I've already said, and her ability to do them has never kind of come into question for me, and I'm so fortunate. But equally, it comes down hand in hand with that building the reliability through use aspect that I wholeheartedly believe in with her. So yeah, in short, my decision 5 years ago, I think, was based on some pretty strong considerations that still mostly hold up. And as I said before, spending a large chunk of my 20s behind the wheel of a Morris Minor named Peggy was a fantastic choice. And I'm really looking forward to the next 5 years, the next decade, and what that brings. I hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit more about my thoughts on the considerations I made at that time and whether I still think they're relevant. I'd love to hear what your questions are about 5 years with Peggy, and I'll be sure to address them in next week's podcast as we celebrate officially 5 years of owning Peggy. And thank you ever so much for listening. Drive safely and happy motoring.